I had never been underground for so long before. The air beneath the old municipal archive was heavy, slow to move, always a few degrees colder than it had any right to be. They told me the vault I was to guard was sealed for preservation, but no one explained what exactly was being preserved. My job description was simple: stay in the storage corridor, make rounds every 2 hours, log any changes. That was all. Yet from the first night, I felt the weight of the place pressing into my bones like damp earth. The silence wasn't empty. It had texture, a subtle grain, as if every stone in the walls held a residue of whispers. The access corridor stretched in 2 directions from my station. To the left, a row of heavy steel doors, each with a number stenciled in flaking paint. To the right, a blind wall of ancient brick, its mortar crumbling, the surface faintly bowed inward. I could smell it whenever I passed. A faint sweetness under the dust, like old paper left in a cellar. My first log entries were uneventful. I recorded temperature, humidity, all within normal ranges. The only irregularity was the sound. At certain hours, never the same, I would hear something like floorboards settling, but slower, as though time itself was reluctant to disturb the stillness. On my 3rd night, I noticed the leather-bound notebook. It sat on the far corner of the desk, under a thick layer of dust that no one had bothered to wipe away. It was unlabeled, its spine cracked with age. The odd thing was, it hadn't been there the night before. Or if it had been buried under other objects. I opened it to find neat handwriting in black ink. The date at the top was from over a century ago, but the words felt unnervingly present. First week in the vault. The silence is deeper here than any I have known. I think it is watching me. I smiled at the odd phrasing, but there was something in the curve of the letters, precise, deliberate, that made me uneasy. The next pages detailed ordinary shifts, inspections, door checks, not unlike my own work. Then, an abrupt shift in tone. Tonight I heard footsteps where no one should walk. They matched my own, but half a beat behind. I closed the book and placed it back, deciding not to read further. Still, when I resumed my rounds, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder more than once, expecting what exactly? I couldn't have said. By the end of the week, my sense of time had begun to fray. The clocks in the vault ran true, but the minutes between chimes stretched oddly. Sometimes my watch ticked audibly, sometimes it didn't. In the notebook, the author began describing strange lapses, losing whole hours between entries, returning from a patrol to find the ink on his previous notes still wet. His words mirrored thoughts I hadn't dared to put into mine, that the vault was not just storing objects, it was holding something in suspension. On my 9th night, during a patrol, I found myself standing before one of the sealed doors, number 6. I had passed it dozens of times without incident, but that night I noticed faint scuff marks at the base, as if something inside had scraped against it from within. I leaned close. The steel felt cold enough to burn my skin, and beneath the chill, there was a slow, rhythmic vibration, too steady for machinery, too deliberate for chance. I wrote nothing in the log about it. The following evening, the notebook's handwriting changed. It was the same hand, but the ink strokes grew hesitant, as though written in poor light or by someone trying to remember how letters worked. "They are asking for my name now," it read. Not aloud. It's in the air, in the hum through the walls. I think they have mistaken me for someone else. The pronoun unsettled me. I turned the page, but the next was blank. Except for the faint impression of words pressed through from an earlier page, like the ghost of a sentence half erased. I could almost read it if I held it under the desk lamp. Almost. I began dreaming about the vault, though I couldn't recall the details. I would wake with the smell of wet stone in my lungs and the taste of metal on my tongue. The dreams left me with the unshakable sense that I had been speaking to someone in the dark, and that I had promised them something. The next shift, I found the notebook open to a page I didn't remember leaving exposed. The date written there was the current one. The entry was brief. "I can hear you reading." I stared at the words until my pulse slowed enough to close the cover. That night, the blind brick wall at the end of the corridor drew me in. My flashlight caught irregularities in the surface, a subtle arch above what might once have been a doorway. My fingers found edges where the mortar had worn away. And there, deep in one corner, a gap wide enough to admit a draft. It smelled faintly of rain and something sweeter, almost floral, yet dry. When I leaned close, I thought I heard a shuffle, like paper sliding against paper. The more I read the notebook, the more my own thoughts began to echo its phrases. I would write in my log and realize I was mimicking its language. "The silence is deeper tonight. I think it is listening." And then one entry broke the pattern. "Oh, if you are me, stop before the wall." I slammed it shut, but the words stuck. The warning was not to open, not to enter, but simply to stop, before the wall, which meant that at some point, I, or whoever wrote this, hadn't. 2 nights later, during my final round before dawn, I heard the hum again, only louder. It seemed to come from everywhere. The steel doors, the brick, the desk under my hand. I followed it, telling myself I was just isolating a maintenance issue. The sound led me to the wall. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I saw not bricks, but depth. Stone steps descending into unlit space. My breath fogged the air, and I felt the cold not on my skin, but inside my lungs. The hum resolved into a voice, low and patient, speaking my name as if it had been waiting decades to do so. I took a step closer. The bricks were back, but the draft was stronger now, and it carried with it the scent of old ink and damp pages, as if the air itself had been stored too long. When I returned to the desk, the notebook lay open. The entry was dated tomorrow. The first line read, "Tonight, I finally answered." My pen hovered over the logbook, but I couldn't make my hand move. Somewhere beneath me the hum went on, steady and certain, like a heartbeat under stone. I didn't sleep the day after that entry appeared. I lay in the cot provided in the break room, the hum still vibrating in the hollow spaces behind my ribs. A sensation as much as a sound. My mind kept circling the same thought. The notebook was writing itself, or I was writing it without remembering. Either way, I was being drawn towards something the way a tide draws silt from the shore, slowly but without pause. I told myself my goal was still the same: complete my contracted term, collect my pay, and leave. But that goal felt thin, almost laughable, against the pull that was forming in me. I no longer cared about the pay. I wanted to know what lay beyond the wall. That evening, I arrived early. The corridor felt subtly different, as if the geometry had shifted in my absence. The steel doors seemed a little taller, the shadows deeper in their frames. I noticed the faint metallic scent again, ozone and rust, coming from the far end. When I reached the desk, the notebook was closed, but a single page had been folded over its cover, held there by a weight I didn't recognize. It was a small, flat key, dark with age, its teeth worn almost smooth. Written on the folded page in the same careful script, "The bricks are thinner than you think." I carried the key with me on my first round. Every door I passed looked the same as it always had, but I kept finding my steps angling toward the wall. The hum was faint but steady, like a memory of a voice you can't quite place. By the second round, my curiosity was no longer something I was trying to resist. It was the only thing holding me upright. I returned to the wall and pressed my ear to the cool brick. The vibration was clearer now, almost like breathing, a slow draw and release. And between those pulses, a sound that could have been pages turning far below. I began scraping at the mortar with the edge of my flashlight. It crumbled more easily than I expected, the dust dry and cold against my hands. Behind the first layer of brick was another, but this one wasn't bonded solidly. A single brick slid forward under my touch, revealing darkness beyond. The smell from the gap was overwhelming now. Damp stone, mold, and something faintly chemical, like the air inside an unopened trunk. My flashlight beam vanished into the black as if it had been swallowed. I hesitated. This was the point where I could still stop, seal the brick back into place, write nothing in the log, and let the question remain unanswered. But I thought of the handwriting in the notebook, my handwriting, and the entries that anticipated my actions. Perhaps this had already happened, and all I was doing was replaying it. That thought made my hand steady. I widened the gap until I could squeeze through. Inside was a narrow passage descending at a sharp angle. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound traveled further than the space should allow. The deeper I went, the warmer the air became. Yet the warmth was without comfort, thick and pressing. The walls glistened in my light, not with moisture, but with a sheen like varnished paper. When I brushed my fingers against it, a fine powder came away, smelling of old ink. The passage ended in a chamber no larger than a storage room. At its center stood a table, and on the table, a stack of notebooks identical to the one upstairs. Their covers were worn, their spines creased, each labeled with a date in the same familiar hand. I picked one at random. The first entry described the day I took this job. Every detail was correct, down to the weather I'd barely noticed. The next entry described this very descent. I flipped ahead, pages and pages I had not yet lived through, each filled with my handwriting. In the margins, there were notes in another, older hand, correcting words, adjusting phrasing, as if editing me. I should have left then, but the final page held me. It was dated far in the future, a date I could not possibly reach. The entry read, "I have been here long enough that the walls know my voice. I write now not to record, but to remember who I was before the archive made me its own." The penmanship was shaking, but still mine. And below it, in the older hand, "Continue." Something shifted in the air then, a subtle realignment. I realized the hum had stopped, replaced by a softer, nearer sound, the scratch of a pen moving across paper. I turned toward it, and at the far corner of the room, in the shadow, I saw the shape of a desk I hadn't noticed before. A figure sat there, its head bent over an open book, the pen in its hand tracing words with deliberate slowness. The light didn't quite touch it, yet I could see the pale curve of a face. My face. I didn't speak. I stepped closer, each movement matched exactly by the figure, as if mirrored. The pen scratched the same words I was thinking, a half second before I thought them. And then I understood, not in the way you understand a fact, but in the way you recognize a place you've dreamed of for years, that the notebooks were not records. They were the vault itself. Every guard who had come here had been written into it, their time spooled out in careful ink, preserved in the same stillness that held the air, the walls, the hum. This was the preservation I had been hired to protect. I reached for the pen. The other hand met mine halfway. The touch was not warm or cold. It was simply the pressure of inevitability. I felt the ink move before the nib touched the page. The words I wrote were not mine, but they carried my weight, my cadence. Somewhere far above, the desk in the main corridor sat empty, the logbook closed. The shift would end with no guard present, yet no one would come to replace me. I had stepped beyond that. Now, when the silence deepens and the hum begins again, I write. I write the next one down into the vault, leaving pages open for them to find. Sometimes, in the space between sentences, I think of the man who first found my name here and how he must have felt when he read it. I understand him now. The archive doesn't take us all at once. It writes us slowly, line by line, until the person we were is only a memory in its margins. And I have stopped wondering what lies beyond the wall. I am the wall.